Welcome to Beneath the Bible, where we're helping you dig deeper and uncover the world beneath the sacred book. Now, like many of you, I'm sure I like to enjoy some Netflix at the end of the day. After work and dinner and getting the kids to bed, sometimes just a little bit of time on the couch with some Netflix is just what you need. There are some great shows out there, but last November, about a year ago, Netflix released a show called Ancient Apocalypse. And well, it's made some waves, and it doesn't seem like the show and its claims are going away anytime soon. We thought it might be fun to pivot from our usual Bible and archaeology videos and address the show and its claims from the perspective of both a Christian and as an archaeologist. Let's dig in. Now, for those of you who haven't seen the show, we'll do a quick summary of the main thesis of the docuseries. For those of you who are already familiar with it, we'll separate out the chapters and you can easily skip to the parts that you'd like to check out. So very briefly, the show is an 8-part docuseries presenting the ideas of the host, Graham Hancock. Hancock is an investigative journalist who has written several books on archaeology and some alternative interpretations of some of the more idiosyncratic sites and finds around the world. Here's his thesis as accurately and charitably as I can present it. His thesis is that during, or maybe prior to and during the Ice Age, there was a complex civilization that populated the mostly coastal areas of the world. This civilization was mostly wiped out during the cataclysms of the Younger Dryas, a geologic episode that ended around 11,700 years ago, or 9700 BC. Hancock and several others believe that the end of the Younger Dryas was initiated by a comet impact or a series of impacts over the ice sheets in what is now Canada and Greenland. In this comet impact hypothesis, there was intense, severe flooding that quickly and catastrophically, even apocalyptically, raised sea levels by several hundred feet. This then decimated the complex Ice Age civilization. But Hancock suggests that refugees from the society made their way around the world and brought knowledge of their civilization with them. Things like agriculture, megalithic architecture, and especially knowledge of the stars, astronomy and astrology. He cites the ubiquity of ancient flood narratives around the world and things like the astronomical alignment of many sites, like Serpent Mound, Göbekli Tepe, and Gigantia, with the equinoxes and the star Sirius. He believes knowledge of this cataclysm was brought by these civilization bringers after the flood, again citing stories like the Quetzalcoatl myth in Mesoamerica. Memory of this civilization may be preserved in things like the Atlantis myth that we read about in the works of Plato. But in general, Hancock sees our society as one with amnesia. We've forgotten our past and may be doomed to repeat it if we don't alter our course and regain a proper and humble perspective on our environment and our world. One of the many contentions of the show is that this theory has not received enough attention. He claims that archaeologists either ignore or have not grappled with his idea, and that some are even suppressing his data. Because of this, Hancock argues that viewers should not rely on the so-called experts, while implying that they should trust and rely on his narrative instead because he's just trying to get this information out to the public. He claims that part of the reason archaeologists are hesitant to accept his theory is because once they do, it will change the paradigm of this entire historical period.
As you might imagine, Hancock's thesis has not been received well by mainstream archaeology, despite the show being something of a hit for Netflix. Throughout the series, Hancock is consistently, relentlessly critical of mainstream archaeologists for not taking his ideas seriously. This is, it seems, a through line of his series, that mainstream archaeology is dogmatic and unwilling to tolerate any dissenting ideas. He cites the Clovis first debate, a very legitimate critique of mainstream archaeology. For those who may not know about it, this is the notion that the Clovis culture, an indigenous American culture known for using large projectile points for hunting megafauna that was first identified at Clovis, New Mexico, was the first human society in the Americas. This was dogmatically enforced through peer pressure amongst archaeologists and, more significantly, through only awarding grants and funding for excavations and professorships to those that affirmed it. There was a long period of time where you either affirmed Clovis first or you didn't work in North American archaeology. And this position was vociferously enforced by little groups like the Smithsonian. Now, because these disputes are largely kept in the family, archaeologists have enjoyed a fairly positive public profile. Indiana Jones has done a lot of the heavy lifting with that, but in general, people really like archaeologists. They think that what we do is fascinating and enjoy learning about it, and this is a really good thing. Other fields don't enjoy such a positive public profile. Lawyers, for example, just aren't treated the same way as we are. So it may be understandable that archaeologists have had a strong backlash to this show. I won't go through all of the different people and groups that have publicly condemned this series, but I'll highlight a letter sent to Netflix by the SAA, or the Society for American Archaeology, back when Ancient Apocalypse debuted. The SAA is one of the largest and most influential professional societies for archaeology in America. They hold a large conference every year where archaeologists gather and present their research, and their statements in general reflect the attitudes of the field. They aren't the only such society. There's Azor, which focuses on research on archaeology in the Near East, and AIA focuses on Greek and Roman archaeology and the classics in general, but SAA is probably the biggest, so their statement really carries some weight. In the letter sent by the president of the SAA, they call on Netflix to reclassify the show from a documentary to science fiction. Some of the more outspoken critics even ask if people should be allowed to watch this show because they say it's so dangerous. The SAA statement only asks it to be reclassified, and they cite several reasons. First and foremost, apparently, is that Hancock aggressively condemns archaeologists, willfully seeking harm to our membership and our profession in the public eye. Secondly, they say there are demonstrably false claims in the show, making the claim of documentary not accurate. Third, the theory Hancock presents has a long-standing association with racist, white supremacist ideologies, does injustice to indigenous peoples, and emboldens extremists.
It's this last point that has turned the show into a culture war flashpoint. It's true that many of the points Hancock makes have a long history. The idea that Atlanteans colonize and civilize the world is not a new idea. Scholars have previously pointed out that Hancock's ideas are at best recycling the long since discredited conclusions drawn by American Congressman, yes, American Congressman, Ignatius Donnelly. Now, Donnelly published a book in 1882 titled Atlantis, the Antediluvian World. So any apparent argument or rejection of Hancock's theory is not necessarily a personal attack or rejection of Graham Hancock. The theory has been around for a long time and has a long history of skepticism among the academic world. Many who have promoted such an idea, though, have historically been explicit in understanding the Atlanteans as white. So having not read all of Hancock's books, nor having seen all of his media or podcast appearances, I personally can't say if Hancock holds to such a belief. And in all fairness to him, this really wasn't explicit in the show, and the whiteness of his Ice Age civilization doesn't seem to be a major point that he tries to make in the series. But this is a reworking of some old ideas which have historically promoted really terrible ideas about white supremacy and the denigration of indigenous people and their achievements. Hancock and the Ancient Apocalypse have been, unfairly or not, lumped in with this, and I hate to call it academic, but ideational history associated with white supremacy. Now, this means the docuseries is dropping into a much longer academic debate with a much longer history than is presented in the show.
All right, so there's a lot going on here, so we're going to have several archaeologists on our team respond to both the docuseries as well as the backlash to it. We're going to do that from our perspectives as both Christians and archaeologists, which may be a bit different than some of the other critiques that are out there. We'll first look at some of the claims Hancock makes, and then have some general takeaways that we think are important. Now, I will qualify this by saying that most of what Hancock talks about qualifies as what we would consider prehistoric archaeology, and the most expansive understanding of prehistoric archaeology as examining human society before the advent of writing. In archaeology, as with most professional fields, the field is too large for any one person to be an expert in everything. Archaeologists tend to have a narrow field of expertise that is both geographically and chronologically bound. There are archaeologists who study medieval Central Asia, or Bronze Age Britain, or the classic Maya in Mexico. And my research is in the Bronze Age, Iron Age transition in the Near East.
Well, my area of expertise is in the Roman late antiquity transition to Eastern Mediterranean. So the specific claims he makes are outside of our area of expertise. But while we may not be able to comment with authority on all of the specific claims of the sites, we can make statements about more general topics and practices within the field, which I actually think are more important than critiquing each and every specific claim he makes about each and every site that he mentions in the show. But before we dive into some of the archaeology, I would like to address one claim or question about the show. Is the show as dangerous as some have claimed? No, it's not. It can be fun and entertaining bit of Netflix if you want it to be, and I take issue with the content of a large number of other shows on Netflix before I take issue with Ancient Apocalypse. Now, this is not an endorsement of the claims made in the show, though. It's just to say that I don't think his show is any more dangerous, whatever that means, than any number of other documentaries on the streamer. We also think it's essential to remember that while Hancock may want you to take his ideas very seriously, Netflix is in the entertainment business. The executives at Netflix probably don't care that much if this is that accurate or not. They're trying to entertain you. They want you to sit on your couch and watch the series and then talk about it with your friends and family so that they'll go and watch it as well. It's not about the education, it's about the entertainment. They want you to pay your monthly subscription and they want you to keep browsing. With all that in mind, we'll turn back to evaluating Hancock's work as archaeology. Hancock and mainstream archaeology really divide on what counts as good data. And this is where we side with the archaeologists. Theories need data, and Hancock's data set is currently a series of megalithic structures that point to advanced understandings of astronomy, mechanical advantage, and social organization beyond what we tend to think hunter-gatherers were capable of doing. But that's not really data that points to there being an Ice Age civilization. Hancock's model requires particular understandings of particular sites, despite them being both thousands of miles and thousands of years apart. Each of the sites he references have alternative interpretations that may be less exciting but are still fascinating in their own right. Furthermore, archaeologists have excavated a lot of sites which date to the Ice Age, even the Younger Dryas period that Hancock focuses on. There are archaeological sites dated to the Younger Dryas period, and none of them show really any evidence of either being Hancock's advanced civilization or of being in contact with it. Hancock has argued that the society was primarily maritime and focused on coastal regions, so finding their sites would entail underwater excavations at extreme depths, extreme for archaeology at least. So to us, it seems pretty convenient for Hancock that all the evidence for his theory is buried under 400 feet of water and then buried under millennia of sediment and debris. It's essentially unrecoverable. It has the effect of making the theory unfalsifiable, and the evidence is always just one more dive away. But we should also note that archaeologists routinely scan the ocean floor, particularly in the Mediterranean, as ancient shipwrecks can be observed using sonar scans of the seabed. And no evidence to this point of an urban landscape has yet been found.
But again, if we're being charitable and assume the direct evidence, if it existed, is long eroded, shouldn't we find indirect evidence of it? If there was a technologically advanced maritime civilization, shouldn't we find evidence of a commercial network? Where are the trade goods? We don't find any. Take the Natufian culture. It existed in modern-day Syria, Palestine during the Younger Dryas period when Hancock's lost civilization ostensibly thrived, but there's no evidence the Natufians were anything other than the most complexly organized society in the region. While they were a step forward compared to earlier eras, they were not on par with societies which came later. They lacked agriculture, ceramics, and other hallmarks of the Neolithic and later periods. So unless the civilization of Hancock's advanced society only began after this lost civilization's own society was destroyed, we don't see any such civilizing effort during the Ice Age. They were apparently invisible during the heyday of their own civilization, entirely insular and only interested in other peoples and cultures once they experienced a cataclysm. Unless they colonized and traded with themselves, then we should expect to find some evidence of them in other Ice Age sites, but we don't. Again, the lack of evidence doesn't prove they never existed, but we should expect some contemporary evidence, right? I mean, that's reasonable. If you have a theory about something in history, you should be able to provide some positive evidence. It's like Hancock is suggesting that at sites like Göbekli Tepe and Gigantia, we have echoes of this society, but archaeologists aren't looking for echoes, but for the orchestra. We have data from the Ice Age, but where's the orchestra?
And this raises another issue around the practice of archaeology. The field is huge. As we have mentioned earlier, everyone in the field of archaeology has a different expertise, and it's because the field is just massive. Just like there are lawyers who practice a particular kind of law or physicians who practice a particular kind of medicine, archaeologists have limited expertise because the field as a whole is just too much for one person to know. At the same time, we know our little sliver of the field inside and out. Each field is like an iceberg, and professionals are professionals because they know not just what is above the surface, but as much as they can about what's below the surface as well. When you go to a lawyer for legal practice, for a legal problem, or are sick and you go to a doctor, you likely have done some reading or have some idea about what you need, but you go see the expert because you know you aren't seeing the whole iceberg. You go to a cardiologist for a heart problem and a dermatologist for a skin problem because they know their part of the field inside and out. And this is how archaeology works as well. A lot of people know a little bit about archaeology, and that's awesome. That's something that we really want to encourage, people learning about and loving our field as much as we do. But there's a lot more to this field than what is easily accessible. Just like a WebMD search doesn't make you a physician, reading a lot about a particular site or issue in archaeology doesn't make you an archaeologist. To become an expert, I had to study for years and learn things like ceramic seriation, archaeological theories, field methodology, stratigraphic sequences, site comparandas, architectural typography or typologies, sociological models, carbon-14 calibration curves, multiple ancient languages, and on and on and on. All that to say that the nitty-gritty of the field of archaeology is largely unseen by the public, but it is all the unseen grunt work, sitting in the libraries, sorting through piles of ceramic sherds, that is what makes the field stable. We can know a site is as old as we say it is because there is a mountain of data that supports that. And just like your physician may not tell you everything on how they know you have this or that condition, they may just give you the diagnosis. So too, archaeologists may not tell you how we came to a conclusion and give you all the information, but there's usually a significant amount of material supporting it. Other archaeologists are aware of this data, even if the general public is not. There is a lot of unseen work that goes into archaeological thought and research, and the field is asking that the public trust that the experts in the field can police the standards of the field and produce the most reliable interpretations of the past. Now, Hancock is out on a limb, and he's asking that you disregard the field as a whole and trust his interpretation over the archaeological field. He sets himself up as one who has seen the real history where all the archaeologists are too afraid to admit that they're wrong and that the entire field is stuck in this sunk cost fallacy. Hancock and those who have support and advance his ideas seem to think there's something nefarious about the field of archaeology, that we are hiding information that falsifies our models. But this just isn't true. This certainly doesn't mean we know it all and can explain absolutely everything. There are still mysteries to explore and puzzles to solve. But most good archaeological work isn't on Netflix, but it is publicly available if you know where to look.
Another feature to be wary of in this series is that Hancock will often narrate versions of various myths generated by the cultures which he is discussing in that particular episode. I understand you can't just read off the entire Utnapishtim story or Quetzalcoatl story, so he abbreviates them. But the stories are abridged with a particular interpretive slant that may or may not reflect the ethos of the original story. Not only that, he can pick the version of the myth that best fits his model. Many scholars have identified that the Quetzalcoatl story that Hancock cites is actually a late iteration of the story. The story of Quetzalcoatl coming from overseas, bringing civilization, and being light-skinned is not the original telling of the myth. This version does exist, but it was the version that was told amongst Mesoamericans in the generations after Cortez's conquest. Historians believe this is essentially part of their coping mechanism, dealing with why their ancestors didn't put up stiffer resistance to the conquistadors. The ancestors of the conquered Aztec peoples project backwards the idea that their parents and grandparents thought Cortez was a god. Otherwise, they would have put up a better fight. If it wasn't for this myth they knew, things would have been different. Evidence from Cholula and other cult sites paint different pictures of the Quetzalcoatl figure, but that's not the one Hancock cites. There are a couple more caveats to all this. Sometimes Hancock uses idiosyncratic material, things that seem to not fit, things that seem out of time or place. These are typically what allow for alternative models or interpretations. Göbekli Tepe is a great example. This is a megalithic site that dates to around 9,500 BC, time before urbanism and agriculture, which archaeologists typically see as prerequisites for such construction projects. The site breaks the mold. It's an incredibly interesting and important site, and it features prominently in his model. But he assumes that the technical knowledge needed to build this amazing site could not have been developed by hunter-gatherers. Surely the knowledge must have come from somewhere and someone else, right? So much from this site seems to be too advanced for the period when it was built, unless a more advanced society existed which contributed to its construction. But while it may require amending the received wisdom of the archaeological models, it doesn't require throwing it out. Furthermore, as more research has been conducted in this area of Turkey, archaeologists have found more megalithic sites, which means Göbekli Tepe isn't out on an island by itself anymore. But it's the idiosyncratic finds, ideas, and gaps in our data set that gain more public attention than the overwhelming majority of archaeological data, which is, quite frankly, just less exciting. At the same time, modern archaeological theories of the past are built on the overwhelming majority of the data, not the idiosyncratic outliers. Academics propose alternative models to the past all the time. You can hear them at conferences every year. A scholar may see a gap in our knowledge and try to fill it with a new model or understanding of the past, but they get critiqued. They get asked, how does your new perspective account for this and this and this? If their theory doesn't account for the available data, the critiques can be brutal. Believe me, the critiques can be savage. Models of the past must account for as much of the data at hand as possible. A model built only on idiosyncrasies and gaps is simply not a good one. And Hancock's whole theory is based on idiosyncratic data and gaps in our knowledge. When we have idiosyncratic finds, it's great to explore them and see how they fit our models or how our models need to change. They typically don't require throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Göbekli Tepe does require us to nuance our understanding of the prehistoric hunter-gatherers, but it does not require us to reject models of prehistory and start from scratch.
This is the other caveat. Archaeology can be dogmatic. Theories and models can and do ossify, and this is a problem that is recognized in the field. It's something scholars, particularly younger ones, are working to remedy. The idea of factoids, or models that are reported and repeated so often they become accepted as fact, is one that archaeologists are familiar with. Every specialty in the field has their own factoids. Some archaeologists a long time ago published their idea on this or that topic, and for one reason or another it gets repeated and repeated until that is the established fact. It's annoying to those of us who may have alternative views from those factoids, but the field has mechanisms for changing them. You do research, you collect data, you present an alternative model with the data, and then you present it to your colleagues. Some may prefer the factoid, but most open-minded scholars can be swayed by the way you present the data, and you can slowly change the field. That's how it works. You wouldn't want the field to be swayed by every new fad or theory that comes along. That would create chaos. It's the slow and methodical process that works, but that's by design. Should the discipline drop some factoids more quickly? Sure. But archaeology is not hopelessly and irreparably dogmatic. Clovis first is now long gone. The field can be convinced to move on from old ideas if the data are strong enough. The comet impact hypothesis, one of the ideas Graham Hancock advocates for, may be similar. A professor at USC recently published a paper in an academic journal that lays out the evidence that this theory may have been prematurely rejected and may best explain the data available. Admittedly, his perspective has been met with some counter-arguments from more mainstream voices, but we'll see how their work is evaluated by the field at large and whether it begins to sway reputable scholars. That's how archaeology works, and Hancock is more than welcome to engage in this process.
But I think some bigger critiques, and ones that as a Christian I think are important, have to do with the general practice of archaeology. Now, wherever you land on the ancient apocalypse thing, whether you think it's wrong or just a silly fun docuseries, or maybe you think there's something to it, maybe he might be right, I think it's important to remember that there is a right way and a wrong way to work in certain disciplines. Mark Marsden makes this point in his book, The Outrageous Idea of Christian Scholarship. While his wider point is that Christian academics ought to be able to bring their faith into their work and scholarship, he does make a point along the way that whether one is a Christian or not, there is a right and a wrong way to work in a particular discipline, that there are standards in the field. If a physician conducts a study but the subjects of it are not fully informed before they consent, then regardless of the results, we would all say that this is a bad study. In archaeology, you don't just go dig holes and make grand statements without the proper data. That's not how we do it. There's a right way and a wrong way to conduct yourself in the field. For those of us who are Christians, not only should we abide by disciplinary norms, we should do our very best to excel at them. Not only should we do what is expected, but we are called for excellence. So as a Christian and an archaeologist, I'm called to do the very best I can in my field. I'd argue that the Bible makes it clear that we are not to be taken in by what is false. We're not to go along with the fads because they confirm our priors, or they're fun, or they feel true, or they anger our ideological opponents. Graham Hancock has a fun and interesting hypothesis. Maybe he's right, though I doubt it. I highly, highly doubt it. I doubt it because he has no evidence that positively argues for it. He has alternative interpretations of existing data sets. But as I said, in the field of archaeology, like so many other fields, has massive data sets, and proper practice of the field demands you deal with all of the data and not cherry pick that which suits your model. So for me, this is part of not only being a good archaeologist, but of being a faithful Christian. While I don't think the show is harmful or dangerous, I do think caution is warranted before you accept the views put forward in the show. I do not think that it fully grapples with all of the data available, and if it did, I do not think the views it espouses would hold up to scrutiny, as cool as it may be if they did.
We want to make one final note about this show as a culture war flashpoint. On this channel, we avoid culture war topics, like the plague. We all have our opinions on various issues our culture fights over, but we just want to talk about archaeology and the Bible. We want to present it accurately and faithfully, and if we do that, you all who watch it can use it, or not, to help form your opinions on these topics. But this docuseries is one of those culture war flashpoints that really is directly related to archaeology. Now, being as charitable to Hancock as I think we can, I do not think he promotes an explicitly white supremacist view of history. However, I do think that what he argues for does diminish the accomplishments of indigenous peoples, which is something that is a frequent feature of white supremacist and other racist historical ideologies. This is what happens on shows like Ancient Aliens and what was done by Ignatius Donnelly decades ago. The idea is that certainly those primitive people, especially if they were in the Americas or sub-Saharan Africa or Asia, could not have achieved such great heights of civilization. Surely they could have not have done the calculations necessary to build this or know astronomy well enough to align their structures like that. They must have been told how to do it. Now, Hancock never explicitly states this and would probably object to this characterization because we don't believe he's a racist or white supremacist. Now, nevertheless, his theory begs the question about the kind of person who told these ancient indigenous people how to accomplish these feats. C.S. Lewis talks about this as chronological priggishness, that people who lived before our time are certainly not as advanced as we are today. The thinking is that advancement and progress always moves forward, and so those behind us are way behind us. I've heard the same argument about why we should reject the Bible's claims about God and its moral framework simply because they come from ancient people, and modern people are, by definition, more advanced. But this is not always or necessarily the case. Christian teaching is clear about the equality of humankind. We're all the same at the foot of the cross. We're just as fallen and sinful today as ancient people were thousands of years ago. There's no room for any racist ideology in Christianity. It cannot and must not ever be affirmed. And while suggesting Göbekli Tepe or Serpent Mound or any number of other ancient monuments were built with knowledge not generated within the cultural tradition that built it, that's not explicitly white supremacist or racist. It might still be in the neighborhood. Thanks for joining us for this Beneath the Bible video. If you liked what you saw, be sure to give this video a thumbs up and let us know down in the comments below. If you want to see more videos like this, YouTube thinks that you'll like the ones that are popping up on your screen now. And finally, we hope that you'll take a minute to share this video with your friends. And until next time, keep digging.